The markets hate uncertainty and investors hate confusion. That's why communication in finance is not marketing, it's valuation. Simon Hylson-Smith, the founder of Paragon PR, is going to talk about that, about crafting credibility, and why AI is screwing with a lot of finance brands. I'm Bryon Morrison. Let's get to the leaders list.
Everything is happening through these screens.
How are we getting the most out of that person?
I want to see this thing grow long term.
Amazing story. You have such a unique perspective on that.
Schedule a 2-week vacation.
I applied those models.
Undervalue, secure your digital footprint as well.
Why were they even put in place in the first place?
Only the most adaptable survive.
Let's get to the leaders list. All right, Simon Hylson-Smith, welcome to the leaders list.
Thank you very much, Bryon. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we are so thrilled to have you. You've had Paragon PR for a long time. You've built that up. It's a recognizable firm. And I think it's really helpful for everybody to kind of get a feel for what the business does first. And then let's roll into the stage of business that you're in after that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We started the business, or I started the business 14 years ago. And originally we were going to be very much content focused. So the discussion today about narrative is very much sort of like what was in the eye of the business. That from the early days, this is what we considered to be an important part of the conversation. But we started off as a PR firm, hence we call ourselves Paragon Public Relations. But we're much more than a PR firm, and our focus has shifted over the last 3 or 4 years to being really about defining brands, positioning brands, telling stories, getting the story out there. And that's what we do, is we help brands become more relevant, more widely known, and more respected.
And do you start that process from understanding the brand internally and how that is communicated to employees and teams, and then how that is expanded outward? I'm just assuming.
Yes, we actually take a 360-degree approach. We try and speak to employees, clients, media, any relevant stakeholders. Now, that's not always possible, but it is really interesting that the perception of stakeholders is often very different externally. The external stakeholders have a different perspective from the internal one. So that's where the storytelling comes in and comes into its own, I think.
Yeah, we talk to clients all the time about, if you go out and do research, you will find, what the perception of the brand is. And I almost every client goes, I think I've got it. And exactly. It's funny because it's never exactly what they perceive it to be. So understanding what their desires are and what they'd like to be known for versus what they're recognized as, that's got to be an incredible process. Like, you've been doing that a long time. Have you gotten to a point where, you look at these clients and go, look, I know what you're going to run into? Or is it open and experimental when you go into it?
We try and keep it as open and experimental as possible so that we're not prejudging the situation. And I think we're pretty good at that. But having said that, within a short number of stakeholder interviews, you can often get a kernel of an idea of how they can really differentiate and distinguish themselves. And then the rest of the interviews can often be used primarily for validation. But they're equally important to make sure there's no mistakes in the thinking there. But we do find that we get the ideas relatively quickly early on, but not before we've spoken to anyone.
Yeah, it's the benefit of having done it for a while. You can probably get to shorthand pretty quick. So as you're going through that process, tell us a little bit about who's the ideal customer for Paragon? Do you guys typically work with large enterprise or startups, or I'm sure you've worked with everybody once or twice at this stage, but what's the ideal customer?
The ideal customer is a larger financial institution, financial technology company that is really going through a period of change and is looking to either become more well-known in a particular area or to retell their story or change their story or get their story out there. That's the ideal customer. But we work from from the startup or even pre-startup all the way through to clients such as the London Stock Exchange Group, which was our first client and remains a client 14 years later. So we have the full range, but the challenge with very small clients is that they tend not to have the resources to be able to do what's really required, and it's understandable. Whereas the larger firms are better funded and have bigger goals and ambitions, and so their missions are, their mission is often larger and more easily understood by the industry at large. So it's a better starting point for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so 14 years. We just think about how much change has taken place in that time, and you guys have obviously gone through quite a bit of change. So what would you describe Paragon PR as today? What business stage would you say that you guys are in?
I think we're still in the stage where we need to scale the business. So I think we're established. I think we have a good reputation. I think we have a good, strong core set of clients. We need to leverage that, put in place the right processes to take us through the next few years, which those processes are changing as a result of AI and similar. Put in place, clearly understood building blocks for scaling the business, which means that when someone joins Paragon, they know that the process for doing A or B or C is the following, and this is the Paragon way of doing it. We know it instinctively now, but we need to memorialize it better and put in place a playbook essentially for ourselves for the next 5 years.
And do you do that with your team? Is that someone's complete focus, or is that one of your initiatives? Who owns that requirement?
I personally take responsibility for making sure it happens, but there are 2 or 3 colleagues that will be working on this and are working on this with me at the moment. I've noticed in the past some venture capital firms we've worked with have done a really good job on this, and, for example, presented us with their playbook for news announcements. So this is the process that you use to announce a major new initiative. You go through these X number of steps. So that's what I want to make sure is in place for all of what Paragon does. We do a good job, but we can become more efficient.
Yeah. So we typically would refer to that as the transformational stage, because if we just think about that common stage that everybody starts off with, where the leadership is in the operating mode and they're doing the work of the day, then you move into a leadership mode where you bring in other players, you become a stronger organization, and you understand succession planning and what great looks like for each of the functional skill sets. But transformation is where you start getting into process change and really starting to optimize the organization. And so that's a very cool process. As you're going through that, what are the things that are on your leaders list right now? That's one big initiative, obviously, but what else do you carry on your leaders list?
A focus on building the brand and building the story for clients, and going deeper and bigger into that space is important for us. We have a lot of collective experience in our industry segment, and we can do a lot of good for clients, but we need to be allowed through the door. The problem with many technology-focused clients is that they think that their product sells itself, but so does the next client that is doing something very similar, and the one after. And we're living in a world in which there are hundreds, if not thousands, of competitors, and becoming known and sticking your head above the parapet and becoming recognized as being distinctive and at the same time relevant is a challenge for many firms, and they don't necessarily see that. They think because they came from a technology background that the technology prowess of their service or product is enough in itself, which it rarely is.
Right. So it's obvious that this is an incredibly important time with so much messaging that's going on. A lot of you talked about AI, and now everyone has relatively simple ways to be able to push out messaging. And so making that authentic and making that connect, obviously it sounds like one of the things on your leaders list is applying your own strategy, right? I mean, just using the Paragon way.
Yes, yes, exactly. And often I think it's better to be niche. The more focused you are as a business, niche is better than saying you do all things to all people. No one really believes that. If I say to you, we do everything for every industry, whatever you've got, don't worry about it. Paragon can provide the answer. It's not really very convincing. Whereas if I say to you that as a team, we've worked with over 100 financial technology firms, and we understand the ecosystem, and we have a legacy of decades in the capital markets, people start having a conversation because you've passed that threshold of credibility. So I think being niche or focused is important.
Yeah, because obviously there's a million PR firms out there, right? So understanding the distribution outlets, the publications, the ways that will resonate when you send that and distribute that message, that alone lets me know where you're going to know, what that category looks for and what that industry looks for.
Yeah, and so getting that story right is one thing, but then getting it out there is a different game altogether, and that's changed dramatically since the start of my career.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, right? We know your leaders list, and thank you for sharing what you're going through and how you're changing that. Let's talk about my leaders list. Let's talk about the other folks that are listening today. What are the things that should be on our list as we start thinking about establishing our brand and getting it out there, just to handle it in a super simple form?
Well, if you go back decades, it was about going out. Certainly, my career started in London. It was about going out for long lunches, getting to know people, getting access. It was about relationships. It was about access. It was about people. And there were a number of key financial publications that were important, such as the Financial Times. Today's a little different, a lot different. To keep it simple, you don't really need to have that many news articles about a particular subject in order to be able to raise your head above the parapet, because fortunately, we're in a digital world where one great article can be used for many months or a year or two. So it's more about quality and getting the right story out there than it is trying to hit 100 different media outlets. It's also very difficult if you were trying to hit, let's say, tens of media outlets with your story. If you're a small to medium-sized financial technology firm, the media don't have the time to focus on your stories. They're not relevant enough. They're too niche. Reporters have more to do now than they ever have, so they don't have the bandwidth to be able to listen to, people like me trying to spam them with multiple emails a day. They're getting hundreds of emails a day, so it's more about getting that quality opportunity. So we tend to focus more on getting that quality opportunity and then leveraging the result of that across various channels over time, because we think that's more important than sweating over trying to get 20 different articles, which is what we might have done 10, 20 years ago.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I see the same thing, right? It used to be that you create a relationship, and even someone like myself, like if I worked with a PR firm, typically what happened was the PR firm would introduce me, I become a subject matter expert, then the publication keeps reaching out to me. And so it was all very relationship based, and that's probably still relevant today. But I do think it's really interesting to think about how one specific article or one specific subject can mushroom across multiple different places. So am I understanding that correctly, that your focus would be like, how do we get something that is a major foothold and then keep building on the momentum of, did you know that this outlet used that?
Yes, and I think what's more important for executives nowadays is to be able to speak coherently and have strong views and opinions and predictions about the industry, rather than just being able to talk coherently about their own business. So, for example, I was on an interview an hour or two ago with a client, with the CEO of a client. And I started off by telling the reporter that this particular CEO has great views and perspectives over a long period of time and currently about innovation and technology and the use of technology in the financial markets. So the reporter should feel free to contact him whenever he's writing another article about another subject. So I'm kind of laying the foundation for the executive being seen as more than just a promotional figurehead of his particular brand, but more of an industry leader. And it's about creating industry leaders, our job. And so that's really what, if you take the concept of creating industry leadership and ally that with creating great stories around the brands, the two go hand in hand together. So that's not always easy. A lot of CEOs are not very well trained in terms of telling their stories. So that's a challenge in itself, which is, yeah.
Well, Simon, give me an example of when you've worked with, because that is the hard part, right? Is making something newsworthy, because everybody thinks that their stuff is newsworthy, right? I mean, all of us are like, well, of course, everybody wants to know this. The reality is typically not like that. So give us a couple of examples of how you've worked with clients to help them find that unique thing that will cut through.
Yeah, I'll give you an example would be the London Stock Exchange Group that we've worked with, as I say, for 14 years. Their post-trade processing area, their clearinghouse, LCH, we've worked with them since the very beginning. And they, back in the early days, they were known as a back office, dusty, people in suits, hidden away in some cellar in London, very parochial type organization. But the world changed after the global financial crisis. The world changed, and they suddenly became more relevant. There was a mandate by global governments to introduce mandatory clearing in the financial markets, which suddenly made this Victorian type institution very relevant to the front office, to the people that were a little bit more sexy, more visible to the world. And so we worked with LCH in terms of like changing the persona and the perception of them in the industry. And we ultimately worked with them to come up with the idea of them really being about the people and the industry. So we spoke to and interviewed, I would guess, many tens of stakeholders with LCH, and worked with them for many months, if not a couple of years, to come up with the idea of them being the market's partner. And so we built the whole story around them being the market's partner, not just some back office service that occasionally people tap into, but on a level footing and working with the industry. So LCH has held numerous gatherings, meetings, get-togethers with the people that really matter. So in the early days, we used the media to help build their brand. But since then, LCH has worked very closely with its members and clients to really build a strong reputation in the industry. And we've worked behind the scenes with them on that for over a decade. So that's probably a good example of taking a client out of the shadows into the mainstream.
And did you use individuals within the organization, or did you try and position the company? Because I think this is a fundamental shift and change that's taken place in business as well.
It was primarily the company that we were trying to bring out of the shadows. There were a couple of visionaries there, and there are today, that were very important in driving that change. So they were incredibly important. But we got the whole company involved and the people involved, and I think that's essential, because if you create a narrative, a story for a brand, and the team, the staff don't follow along with it and buy it and embrace it, it will fall to pieces. You will get salespeople going out there and telling different stories. No one's going to be telling a consistent story, and consistency of that narrative is really essential for it to be impactful.
Yeah, I've often said the fastest way to blow up a brand is to say something in the marketplace, advertise something, and then as soon as they talk to an individual in the organization, if it doesn't match, I immediately don't have trust. I distrust the brand from that point. And so then it's a matter of like, it's cracked egg theory, right? I mean, I'm constantly examining the egg, thinking something's wrong, as opposed to, wow, this feels comfortable and I'm engaged and I like it.
I think there needs to be 3 key elements for the narrative to really survive. One is truth. It has to be factually correct. You can't, claim that you're something that you're not. That if you did, you would get yourself in legal trouble as well as brand trouble. But secondly, I think authenticity. It has to be believable. You can't position yourself as, the cutting edge of innovation, and then the place is completely dry and crusty, and there's no resource put towards innovation whatsoever. So there has to be an authenticity that the employees believe in and support. And I think thirdly, that there has to be a story that is relevant and of interest to stakeholders. There's no point in having a narrative that nobody cares about. So, because however much you live and breathe it, if nobody cares, what's the point? So we try and, we try and live that in terms of the way that we work with clients.
And this is just a crazy question, but Simon, have you ever worked with anybody and you said, this is so boring, there's nothing of interest?
Well,
we cannot find that position.
As you can imagine, working in financial technology, it can get challenging. There's always something, though. There's always some angle. The challenge is not necessarily finding the angle, but getting the enterprise, the people across the enterprise to buy into that and believe it. Because often they might be boring and they might not want to break the mold or to be too out there in terms of the way that their story is told. Just repeating what I was saying earlier, because they may believe that their product is good enough by itself. So why do we have to take the chance of positioning ourselves in this way or that way?
Yeah, I've seen that so many times, so I can imagine. And you're being kind, because I know you've been in meetings where you've been like, this is going to be hard.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, it is hard because that's why we get paid. If it was too easy, we would just stick it into ChatGPT and the answer would come out, which does actually raise another point. AI, it seems at the moment that AI dulls a brand. It comes up with generic solutions. If you use AI to try and solve your brand issue, you're going to end up with something that sounds like everybody else. And in fact, we have hopefully a soon-to-be client that is a financial technology company that is looking to redefine its mission, vision, values, and they actually tried to use AI to do it and were very dissatisfied with the results that they got, so that they ended up speaking to some public relations agencies, including ourselves, because they were very dissatisfied with what I was just describing.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you brought that up, because there is no shortage of information. And of course, AI can be a great thought partner, but you have to understand and discern when AI is just giving you what you want to hear and it's really homogenizing your brand. And I agree with that 1000%. There's if you just think about the point of the technology is to look across everything that is out there and give the next natural, most obvious answer. Relevant, but obvious, because it's looking for what's right.
Yes, we use AI primarily for 2 reasons. One is 2 uses. One is research. It's very good at helping you research particular subjects. And the second is drafting articles in terms of providing sort of starting point. Although we've actually experimented recently with doing it the other way around. We would write an article and then use AI to check to see if there are any flaws in the way it's structured or written to give us ideas. So kind of like the reverse approach. But we never use it to single-handedly write an article. Only potentially a first draft. But the research side, it can be tremendously time-saving. So that's especially valuable, we're finding.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's assume that we agree with and believe that our narrative can actually become a moat, and it can be a strategic support tool. And we recognize that we need to make sure that that is true, authentic, and newsworthy.
Yes.
If I am thinking about that and I'm listening to you, I'm going to stop listening and I'm going to go do what? What should be the most immediate thing that I go do and put on my leaders list to take advantage of this information you've given?
I think there's another three things that rule of threes. There's another three things that we need to do in that situation as a company, as a technology firm, let's say, or a financial services firm. One is to make sure that your end goal is clear, your mission. So before you do any of this, make sure that you understand what you want to be when you grow up, as it were. What is the real goal of this? Well, how will success be defined in the future, in 2 or 3 years? What are you trying to do? Because if it's not aligned, then the rest won't matter. So firstly, determine your goals, make sure they're in writing and that everyone embraces them. Secondly, listen to the stakeholders, do the work, either internally or commission an agency to help you discover and unlock the uniqueness about your brand so that you can build a story around it and frame that story and build that out and do it properly. Spend time on it, spend a few months on it, spend some money on it, and really work hard at getting that story right that supports that end goal that you've established. And the third thing that you should do is put in place a plan, and activate a plan to evangelize that narrative, to make it real, to make it to go out there into the marketplace and make it happen. So those are three really key elements to it: determining the goals, determining the narrative, and then activating it. That's the way we would break it up.
That's fantastic. And I will say one key part of that, determining the narrative, I would actually suggest that you should split that out, because the first thing you said was, I think, incredibly important. So after we find our why and we identify what we're trying to get done, listen to stakeholders. And that is a very challenging thing for a lot of people. That's why I do often suggest that even if you should have your own advisory board, you should have your people you should go out and reach out to. A lot of people have their own client advisory board. Those are great, solutions. But when you start looking for why people work with you, what they like about you, what is unique about you, it's invaluable to have a third party be able to hear that at minimum, just be in the room, but even better yet, to drive that process.
As an example, Bryon, we did a big project last year for a large global information provider. They wouldn't let us speak to their clients. They only wanted to set up 20 or 30 interviews with their internal stakeholders, which presents problems because you start, believing your own stories,
Yeah.
So it's like it becomes sort of like reinforcing. You just believe everything that you're telling yourself, which is not a good, an optimal way of really looking at your brand.
Yeah, it's like an aspirational echo chamber, right? I mean, we know what we'd love to be known for, but the question is, does anybody care? Does anybody want that? Do they acknowledge and believe it? So it may be true, but is it authentic and does it resonate? Those are all things that, a professional group like Paragon can be that thought partner and be a truth provider in some of those cases too, because a lot of times we might not hear what we want to hear.
And we can do a better job ourselves of listening to people externally, to clients and others, about what they think our greatest values, the value that we offer, or what are our moats. And, we can do a better job of listening to clients or potential clients and really trying to understand where their pain points are, because the answers are about listening to people, not about telling them stuff. So
Yeah.
that's really what, our business is about: listening to people. I mentioned, if I can mention a quick story about the Red Cross, where I volunteer, and we go out and see people in the aftermath of fires primarily. People are having one of the worst, if not the worst day of their life, but it's not really about sitting down with them and telling them everything's going to be all right. It's about sitting and listening to people and trying to empathize and form a bridge or a relationship with people and trying to get underneath, you know, what their major concerns are, and then perhaps how you can help them in the short term. But that's what it's about. It's about, we're kind of like armchair, in a way we're like armchair psychiatrists, you know, like listening to people and trying to figure out the solutions.
Yeah. And it is bigger than somebody saying specifically, this is the answer for your brand. Even if someone said that in an interview, it's usually uncovering an insight. It's someone's ability to have that research mindset and keep scratching away until they find that unique insight. And so being able to listen for it, but also being able to recognize it when it's said is, you said that it's hard. I would tell everybody out there, like, find a professional to help you through that process, because that is very challenging.
And we have a good team, and we have someone who's in London who's really good and who's got a blend of background between financial and non-financial clients. And so it's important, I think, to bring a perspective that's as broad as possible. At the same time as having the domain knowledge, to have an open mind and an experienced mind, and to be able to think laterally and creatively, because otherwise it becomes groupthink, and you end up being like that AI model that I was talking about that ends up with generic positioning and storytelling about each of these companies. So I like to have on our teams, when we work with clients, I like to have a mix of experience and personalities and backgrounds to try and come up with different viewpoints.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Simon, thank you so much for bringing these gems to all of us, so that we can understand what should be on our leaders list, and we wish you the best of luck with your own.
Thank you very much, Bryon.